In this video, we're going to take you through firmware updating the video over IP transmitters and receivers. We would always recommend making sure the firmware across the estate of transmitters and receiver is consistent to ensure interoperability. This is best carried out after the basic configuration of your system. Navigating to the Update Firmware tab of the ACM210's web GUI will show an overview of the system, outlining the firmware on each individual transmitter and receiver. From this page here, we can see that Receiver 1 and Receiver 4 have slightly older firmware than the rest of the unit. You'll need to download the Video over IP firmware from the product page of the transmitter or receiver in use. This can be accessed from the Firmware tab and clicking on the Firmware page's icon within the tab. Inside the firmware package that will be downloaded to your computer, you will be given the firmware for both TX and RX together. In this case, the firmware on the Bluestream website is newer than all of the units on our system. Once downloaded, click the button marked Upload TX or RX firmware. Click the Select Files button to load either the TX or RX firmware file that you have previously downloaded. The firmware will be uploaded to the ACM210 for deployment to individual TX or RX units as required. Once uploaded, you can then deploy the firmware to the units individually. In this case, we have uploaded the TX firmware first. Once uploaded, the Update button next to each of the units will be available to click to deploy the firmware to the transmitter. Whilst the firmware is being deployed, please do not power off the device in question or power off the ACM210. Once the firmware has been deployed, the pop-up will inform you that the upload has been successful. Close the window and now the unit will reboot. Repeat this process across all transmitters in the system until all of the units have matching firmware. The process can then be repeated for the receivers by uploading the firmware to the ACM210 and deploying to each of the receivers. Some of our video over IP platforms will allow for multiple units to be updated simultaneously. Where this is possible, there is a button marked Update All. Within the IP200 and IP300 series, it is only possible to upload firmware to a single unit at a time.